Hello, my name is Dan Savoy.
And this is Winan Lei. We'd like to talk to you about the new BPM UI Toolkit that came with the June 2017 release of IBM BPM.
The objective today is to provide an introduction to IBM BPM's new user interface toolkit. It's called BPM UI. Here are the key takeaways. The main point is the first one, that IBM BPM's new UI toolkit represents a big leap forward. Supporting points. Number 2, BPM UI includes many additional controls. Number 3, BPM UI controls are more configurable and robust than ever. Number 4, BPM UI is fully integrated into IBM BPM. And finally, number 5, BPM UI makes medium and advanced authoring much simpler. Here is a little more context about our key point. First is that the BPM UI Toolkit replaces the Responsive Coaches Toolkit. The Responsive Coaches Toolkit is now deprecated. Second is that the BPM UI Toolkit is based on the Spark UI Toolkit from Salient Process. You may be familiar with the Spark UI Toolkit. Third is that Spark UI is a proven technology in the IBM BPM ecosystem. It has been deployed for several years and used to be known as Americon Views. Last is that BPM UI is now IBM's default UI toolkit. Here is the announcement from June 2016 announcing IBM's intent to acquire and integrate the Spark UI toolkit into IBM BPM. In the past year, IBM's been doing just that. We can also see in the latest release of the Knowledge Center documentation the controls documented in the BPM UI toolkit. Again, if you're a Spark UI user, these will be quite familiar to you. Another good source of documentation is the Salient Process website itself. At least for a while, this should be a good place to find documentation. They have forums, they have how-to videos, and they have a knowledge base of information. Going forward though, the IBM Knowledge Center and the IBM BPM Dev site and forum will be the key places to find documentation on BPM UI. The last thing to look at is a new process application created with the latest version of IBM BPM. You'll notice the default toolkit is in fact BPM UI. If I look at adding a toolkit, we can see that Responsive Coaches is in fact deprecated. If I look at a brand new client-side human service, I can see that the button from BPM UI is the default, and I'll configure its appearance. We can also see some of the other controls that come in BPM UI, such as the well, and also we'll add a chart. From this, we can see how quickly we can build and display a coach with the new BPM UI toolkit. BPM UI includes many additional controls. This makes it much easier for BPM authors to easily deliver compelling coaches to end users. On the bottom right, you can see the list of BPM UI controls. Certainly there are a broader number than what was provided with the Responsive Coaches toolkit. This is a superset that not only includes basic functionality, but also includes a lot of additional areas of capability. For instance, things users expect to see. There's full theme support, there's support for wells, there's support for badges, there's support for breadcrumbs and progress bars. Likewise, chart capabilities are greatly enhanced. There's capabilities for device sensors, geolocation, maps, and video. There's capability for responsive design, not only for that which is supported by the web process designer, but also more granular control provided by BPM UI. This page shows a collection of screenshots meant to illustrate various different things that BPM UI can be used to build.
BPM UI is an improvement in quality as well as in quantity. The new controls are more configurable and robust. Let's take a look at select controls or drop-downs. I've built a couple. The first one is a pretty short one with 3 entries in it, and the second one has a bunch of entries. Here's how I configured them. Go to the Config tab for the Select control. Under Items, you'll see the Item Lookup Mode. There are a few options to choose from. In the first case, I used the static list, and you'll see down here that the items are entered in directly. In the second example, I used, under the Item Lookup Mode, items from a config option, and I passed it a list variable called Instruments. That variable, I actually set it in a previous step where I'm retrieving from a service. Each of the BPM UI controls is well documented in the IBM Knowledge Center for BPM. You'll see explanations about all the config options as well as examples. Now let's look at table controls. Here's an example table of musical instruments. There are a bunch of configuration settings available for tables. There are some for controlling the behavior, how the columns are displayed, the overall appearance, as well as the performance. Let me expand the behavior tab here, and you'll see that there are a number of options available. I haven't selected any so far, but let me turn a few of them on. Okay, and now when we press play, the new table has a lot more stuff on it. There's some information showing you how many entries. There's a way to navigate between pages. There's a pagination setting. You can select different records in the table, and you can even delete some. BPM UI is fully integrated into IBM BPM. We've already shown you that BPM UI is now the default UI toolkit for all new apps.
To get an even better idea of what BPM UI provides, IBM is now shipping a process application called Discover BPM UI Sample. Within that process application, you'll find a client-side human service that's called Discover BPM UI. When you run BPM UI, you'll see a tabbed interface. It illustrates various capabilities, and it allows you not only to get some ideas, but also to dig in and look at how certain things are implemented. The first tab, as you'll notice, is more of an application-centric use case. It contains various controls from the basic to some that are more advanced. There's another tab that illustrates different capabilities of charts, or bar charts, and various charts that are all responsive. Likewise, you'll notice various capabilities of tables. There are basic tables that require data to be loaded, as well as tables that are loaded asynchronously. You'll find there's a lot better performance with tables. Here we see filtering, as well as over 2,500 entries that are paginated. We'll see tables and how information can be inserted into tables, how it can be easily edited, and how it can be exported. In addition to base functionality, we'll get an idea for how different forms of validation can be done. In other words, validation that can be done right at the point of data entry, validation that can cause alerts to pop up, validation that can be done by popping up modals, as well as validation that will highlight different fields on your form. Later, you'll hear a little bit more detail on formulas. Basically, formulas allow you to build more sophisticated coaches much more easily by totaling up values in fields in a very concise way.
BPM UI works well with existing process apps as well as with other UI toolkits. When you load up an app built in a previous version, its UI toolkit will be retained. In this case, it's 8.5. If you have an app that uses a third-party UI, such as BP3's Brazos UI, you won't see any changes. There's very little difference if you have an app that was built on a previous version of Spark UI. You'll see the toolkit displayed as BPM UI rather than Spark UI. If you like, you can upgrade the app to the current version of BPM UI. BPM UI makes medium and advanced authoring much simpler. Depending on your business needs, your UI screens may require more complex capabilities, such as those listed here. Let's take this very simple example. I have two items, and I'd like to calculate the total. So I'll add some numbers in, and as you can see, the total column is automatically updated. Let's look at how I configured it. If we open up the decimal fields, you'll see that I named their control IDs item 1 and item 2, so I can refer to them a little later. Now if we look at the total field and we expand its events section, you'll see that I entered a value formula there, and it's a simple expression that sums up item 1 and item 2. So how did BPM UI help? BPM UI controls can be addressed using the simple notation you just saw. The new Events section in the Properties sheet allows you to define custom behaviors. Now let's add to our example. I want a new button called Clear that resets the item values to 0. If we look in the events section, the onClick event has an expression that sets the value to 0. That expression used one of the APIs that's available for that control. You can see documentation for the controls on the Salient website. Here's another example. I have a question in my coach. Depending on the answer to the question, I'm going to prompt the user to enter some more information to explain themselves. This is done very easily. I have a switch control, which is new in BPM UI, and I have this text area in which I will show or hide depending on the answer in the switch control. Here's a more advanced example. I built a little dice game. When you press the roll dice button, it's going to generate 2 random numbers and update the images for the dice. In the roll field, you'll see the total of the 2 rolls, and if it's a special roll, like a double, you'll see that highlighted as a badge. It keeps a track of the previous rolls. On the right-hand side, a chart is dynamically displaying how many of each roll has occurred. In summary, BPM UI gives IBM BPM a big upgrade in terms of UI capabilities. BPM UI comes with a bunch of new controls, which are configurable and powerful. BPM UI is fully integrated into the product and is now the default toolkit. And finally, BPM UI allows you to build simple all the way to advanced UIs with ease. Thanks so much for tuning in. Catch us online at bpmania.com.